Lac-Mégantic rail disaster. On July 6, 2013, a freight train carrying backing crude oil was parked near Nantes, Quebec. The engineer thought everything was safe, so he shut down the locomotives, but soon after, the train started rolling downhill. By the time it reached Lac-Mégantic, at 1:14 a.m., disaster struck. The train derailed right in the middle of town, and the tank cars exploded, sending a massive fireball through downtown. Over 30 buildings were destroyed, and 47 people lost their lives. It's still remembered as one of Canada's deadliest rail disasters. When the Transportation Safety Board of Canada looked into it, they found a lot of problems. Not enough handbrakes, poor safety procedures, and weak oversight. The report called for better training and stricter rules. After the disaster, Lac-Mégantic faced serious environmental damages and many buildings had been torn down. This tragedy pushed North America to tighten rail safety, especially when it comes to securing parked trains and transporting dangerous materials. Even years later, many in the town still deal with the emotional toll, with about half of the residents suffering from PTSD. Ottawa bus train crash. On the morning of September 18, 2013, a double-decker bus, Route 76, left Ottawa's Fallowfield station with 83 passengers on board heading downtown. At the same time, Via Rail Train 51 was leaving Ottawa for Toronto. Around 8:48 a.m., the bus approached a level crossing near Woodbridge Avenue, and the warning lights and gates came down, signaling a train was coming. But the bus didn't stop. It was going about 42 miles per hour, just a little over the speed limit, and passengers started yelling at the driver to stop. He hit the brakes just 3 seconds before the impact, but it was too late. The bus crashed into the train and sadly 5 people, including the driver, lost their lives. 35 others were hurt, with 5 seriously injured. Fortunately, no one on the train was harmed. So, the Transportation Safety Board of Canada looked into the crash and found that the bus driver might have been distracted by a video monitor used to watch passengers on the upper deck. This, along with the bus going too fast and the brakes coming on too late, played a big part in the crash. The TSB recommended that we need better guidelines to cut down on distractions inside vehicles, improve bus safety, and even add event recorders. They also suggested the City of Ottawa think about building overpasses at crossings like Woodbridge Avenue to avoid something like this ever happening again. It was a huge wake-up call for better safety at rail crossings and making sure drivers stay focused. Canoe River train crash. On November 21, 1950, a troop train left Camp Shiloh in Manitoba, heading west with 23 officers and 315 men from the 2nd Regiment Royal Canadian Horse Artillery. They were on their way to Fort Lewis, Washington, for training before heading to the Korean War. At 10:35 a.m. near Canoe River, the troop train collided head-on with the eastbound Canadian National Railways Continental Limited. The crash was catastrophic. 21 lives were lost, including 17 soldiers and the crews of both trains. The cause? A miscommunication in train orders. A telegraph operator had accidentally left out crucial words, causing both trains to think they had the right of way. In the aftermath, the telegraph operator faced manslaughter charges but was ultimately acquitted, with future Prime Minister John Diefenbaker defending him. The disaster led the Canadian National Railway to implement block signaling and realign the tracks to improve safety. Memorials were erected to honor the fallen soldiers, including one at Canadian Forces Base Shiloh and another near the crash site. Janette's Creek train wreck. In the dead of night on October 27, 1854, a Great Western Railway passenger train set off from Niagara Falls heading toward Windsor. The train, which had 4 first-class cars, 2 second-class, and 2 baggage cars, carried many German immigrants on their way to the U.S. Throughout its journey, it was facing several delays, dense fog, a derailed gravel train, mechanical issues, and slower freight traffic ahead, pushing it at least 4 hours behind schedule. At around 5 a.m., on that foggy morning, the passenger train headed toward Baptist Creek near what's now Janette's Creek in Chapman, Kent, Ontario, when disaster struck. A gravel train, with 15 cars full of wet gravel, had been fixing the tracks and was parked on a siding. The night watchman mistakenly told the gravel train's engineer that the passenger train had already passed. So, the engineer reversed the train onto the main line. In the thick fog, neither train could see the other coming. The passenger train, going about 20 miles per hour, came out of the mist and crashed into the gravel train, which was moving at around 10 to 12 miles per hour. The impact was devastating. The second-class cars were completely destroyed, with almost everyone on board either killed or seriously hurt. Even first-class passengers at the front didn't escape the horror. Eyewitnesses said bodies, including 11 women and 10 children, were horribly mangled. Rescue teams struggled, and 6 hours later, many bodies were still stuck in the wreckage. Around 48 to 60 people were injured and taken to Chatham, where the town was flooded with sounds of the wounded and the sight of blood-soaked survivors. A grand jury held conductor Twitchell and engineer Kettlewell responsible for 52 deaths in Janette's Creek train wreck, charging them with manslaughter. They had illegally entered the main line in heavy fog. It was Canada's first major train disaster and, at the time, the deadliest rail accident in North America. Bellowell train disaster. For the passengers of a Grand Trunk railway train, on the early hours of June 29, 1864, started out normally. The train was about to leave Quebec City and was heading for Montreal. The total count for the passengers was between 354 and 475 on board, many of whom were German and Polish immigrants who had just arrived in Canada. As the train neared the Bellowell Bridge over the Richelieu River near Mont-Saint-Hilaire, the bridge was open to let river traffic pass. A red signal light a mile ahead warned about the open bridge, but the train's engineer William Burney and conductor Thomas Finn didn't stop. At around 1:20 a.m., the train, including its 11 coaches, plunged into the river. Landing on a barge below, the train sank into the water, which was about 10 feet deep. The disaster resulted in 99 fatalities and around 100 injuries. It was surely the deadliest of its time. Rescue efforts started right away, with crews from nearby boats and local residents doing everything they could to save survivors. The injured were taken to hospitals in Montreal, and those who have died were buried in local cemeteries. An investigation found that Burney, who had just been promoted and wasn't familiar with the route, ignored the warning signals. This was a clear violation of safety rules. He was found guilty of negligence and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Rogers Pass avalanche. In the early 1900s, the Canadian Pacific Railway's transcontinental line passed right through the dangerous Rogers Pass in British Columbia's Selkirk Mountains. This route was known for heavy snow and avalanches, so it needed constant upkeep to keep it open. Then, in March of 1910, after 9 days of intense storms that dumped over 6 feet of snow, a massive avalanche came down from Cheops Mountain and buried the tracks near Shed 17. A crew of 63 men, including a rotary snowplow, was sent to clear the line. As they worked through the night, another avalanche suddenly hit Avalanche Mountain at 11:30 p.m., burying the crew. The force of it was so strong that the 91-ton locomotive was hurled 50 feet and landed upside down. Tragically, 58 men lost their lives, making it Canada's deadliest avalanche. Among the victims were 32 Japanese workers, showing just how diverse the crew was that kept the railway running. The only survivor was fireman Billy Lachance. He was knocked over by the strong wind from the avalanche but wasn't hurt otherwise. Rescue teams from nearby Revelstoke arrived quickly, but sadly, there was no one left to save. Their job shifted to recovering bodies buried under 32 feet of snow. Some victims were found standing, frozen in place, a haunting reminder of how suddenly the avalanche had struck. This disaster, along with over 200 avalanche-related deaths in the previous 26 years, pushed the Canadian Pacific Railway to find a safer route. So, in 1913, they started building the Connaught Tunnel, a 5-mile tunnel through Mount Macdonald to bypass the dangerous pass. When it was finished in 1916, it became Canada's longest tunnel at the time, finally putting an end to the railway's direct exposure to Rogers Pass's deadly avalanches. Dejardan Canal disaster. On March 12, 1857, a Great Western Railway passenger train left Toronto, heading for Hamilton, carrying about 90 passengers. As it neared Dejardan Canal, close to Hamilton, the train was moving along steadily toward a swing bridge over the canal. At around 5:40 p.m., disaster struck. A broken axle caused the train to derail just as it reached the bridge. The weight of the train caused the wooden bridge to collapse, and the train plunged 60 feet into the frozen canal below. The engine and tender broke through the ice, while the passenger cars were left in a dangerous position, with some even partially submerged. The aftermath was devastating. Out of the 90 passengers, 59 tragically lost their lives, making it one of the deadliest rail disasters in Canadian history. Rescue efforts were tough because of the freezing waters and wreckage. Rescuers used lamps and fires to light up the scene, and ropes, ladders, and axes to try to reach survivors and recover the bodies. An investigation later revealed that a broken axle on the locomotive caused the derailment, which in turn led to the collapse of the bridge. This tragedy really brought home the need for better railway safety and stricter maintenance to prevent something like this from happening again. Point Ellis Bridge disaster. On May 26, 1896, Victoria, British Columbia was lively with excitement for Queen Victoria's 77th birthday. And to handle that large number of people, the Consolidated Electric Railway Company ran streetcars, including the ill-fated car number 16. Car number 16 was overcrowded, with 143 passengers packed inside as it approached the Point Ellis Bridge over the Upper Harbor. Around 1:40 p.m., the bridge couldn't hold the weight and collapsed, sending the streetcar and its passengers into the water. Tragically, 55 people died, making it one of the deadliest transit accidents in Canada's history. Right after the disaster, bystanders and local residents rushed to help. One of the most notable acts of bravery was Mr. Justice Drake's daughters, who saved 7 people from the wreckage. The Grant House on Bay Street turned into a makeshift clinic, with the injured getting care in the drawing room while the deceased were laid out on the lawn. A coroner's jury later found the Consolidated Electric Railway Company mostly responsible for the tragedy, as they allowed the streetcar to be overloaded beyond the bridge's capacity. The city of Victoria was also blamed for not properly maintaining the bridge and not enforcing weight limits. This tragedy showed how badly safety regulations and infrastructure needed improvement, leading to major changes in public transit safety in the area. Spanish River derailment. This tragedy took place on January 21, 1910, when the Canadian Pacific Railway's Sioux Express Train No. 7 was heading west from Sudbury, Ontario, with about 100 passengers on board. As the train neared the Spanish River near Nairn, Ontario, things took the turn. It derailed while rounding a curve, and the second-class coach broke off, crashing into the bridge's iron structure. One half of the coach fell into the freezing river, while the other caught fire from the oil stoves used for heating. The first-class coach and dining car followed, both tumbling into the river, with the first-class coach sinking deep into the cold waters. The sleeping car fell onto a snowbank, protecting its passengers from the worst of the crash. Rescue efforts were delayed because the crash happened in such a remote area, and the harsh winter conditions made it even harder. But some survivors, like mail clerk William Dundas and conductor Thomas Reynolds, showed incredible bravery, helping others even though they were injured themselves. Help didn't arrive for 5 hours, and sadly, many passengers didn't survive that long. The death toll was between 43 and 70, making it one of the deadliest train disasters in Canada. While no one knows the exact cause, things like poor track conditions, speed, and braking issues were suspected. 1999 Bourbonnais, Illinois train crash. On the night of March 15, 1999, Amtrak City of New Orleans was on its usual route, heading south from Chicago to New Orleans. It was a busy train, carrying 207 passengers and 21 crew members through the quiet towns and countryside of America. Everything seemed normal until about 9:47 p.m. when the train approached the small village of Bourbonnais, Illinois. What no one on board knew was that something unexpected was waiting on the tracks ahead. A semi-truck loaded with steel tried to beat the train at the McKnight Road crossing, even though the signals were flashing and the gates were down. The train engineer slammed on the brakes, but at 79 miles per hour, there was no way to stop in time. The train crashed into the trailer, causing a huge derailment. Both locomotives and 11 passenger cars went off the tracks, with some even crashing into nearby freight cars. Sadly, 11 people lost their lives and more than 100 were injured. It was a truly heartbreaking event. That risky move led to tragedy. After the investigation, the NTSB called for stricter rules and pushed for adding train event recorders, like a black box for trains, at all new or upgraded crossings to help prevent future accidents. 2024 Norfolk Southern train crash. In the early hours of March 2, 2024, a Norfolk Southern train was just doing its usual thing, traveling from Landers, Illinois to Elizabeth, New Jersey, carrying all sorts of goods that are important for businesses. But as it made its way near Easton, Pennsylvania, something unexpected happened, setting off a chain of events no one saw coming. Around 7:11 a.m., the eastbound Norfolk Southern train slammed right into another Norfolk train that had stopped on the same track. The crash was bad, with 3 rail cars derailing and blocking the westbound track. Just moments later, a westbound freight train couldn't stop in time and crashed into the wreckage, causing 6 more rail cars and 2 locomotives to derail and spill diesel fuel into the Lehigh River. Thankfully, the tank cars carrying ethanol and butane residues didn't leak, which kept the situation from getting even worse. 7 crew members had minor injuries, but were quickly treated and sent home. When the NTSB investigators looked into the crash, they found that the automated positive train control system, which is supposed to stop accidents like this, didn't activate in this situation. This raised concerns about how the system works and led to talks about improving rail safety technologies. After the incident, Norfolk Southern estimated the damage to be around $2.5 million. Environmental teams quickly set up containment booms to manage the diesel spill in the Lehigh River, which helped limit the damage to the environment. 1990 Backbay rail crash. On December 12, 1990, Amtrak's Night Owl, an overnight train heading from Washington, D.C. to Boston, was cruising along as it neared Backbay Station. It was around 8:23 a.m., and the train carrying 190 passengers approached a curve. The speed limit for that curve was 30 miles per hour, but the train was speeding through it at a dangerous 76 miles per hour. The high speed caused the Night Owl to derail, and it crashed right into a MBTA commuter train from the Stoughton line, which was arriving at Backbay with about 900 passengers. The crash left 453 people injured, including 7 firefighters who had rushed to help. Amazingly though, no one lost their life in this awful accident. It was so intense that it destroyed 3 locomotives and several passenger cars, causing major damage to the tunnel and Backbay Station, which ended up being closed for 6 days. All in all, the total damage was around $14 million. When the NTSB investigated, they discovered that an apprentice engineer was driving the Night Owl, and the supervisor had a history of safety issues. The train was speeding to make up for delays, and the crew didn't follow speed limits. Amtrak also got called out for not properly training or supervising their engineers. After this incident, Amtrak revamped training and added warning systems to enforce speed limits, aiming to prevent future accidents. 1943 Frankfurt Junction rail crash. It was September 6, 1943, and the Pennsylvania Railroad's pride, the Congressional Limited, was speeding from Washington, D.C. to New York City. On board were 541 passengers, many of them servicemen taking a much-needed break during a Labor Day weekend. Everything seemed fine as the train approached Frankfurt Junction in Philadelphia around 6:12 p.m. But then, out of nowhere, a journal box, a part that keeps the axle running smoothly, overheated and caught fire. The fire caused the axle to fail completely, and in an instant, 8 of the train's 16 cars flew off the tracks in a horrifying crash. The scene was devastating. 79 people lost their lives and 117 others were injured. Rescue crews worked tirelessly for hours, trying to pull survivors and victims from the twisted wreckage. It was a moment of sheer chaos and heartbreak that no one could have prepared for. Investigations pinpointed the overheated journal box as the primary cause. Such hot boxes were notorious hazards, as they could lead to axle failures if undetected. In this instance, the issue went unnoticed until it was too late. After this disaster, there were big improvements in the technology used to detect equipment problems before they could lead to something so devastating. 1950 Kew Gardens rail crash. It was the evening rush on November 22, 1950, and a packed Long Island Railroad commuter train just left Pennsylvania Station in Manhattan, heading for Hempstead. With about 1,000 passengers on board, it was supposed to make its first stop at Jamaica Station. As the train neared the Kew Gardens station in Queens, the engineer spotted a go slow signal and hit the brakes. But something went wrong. Instead of slowing down as expected, the brakes malfunctioned, and the train came to an abrupt, unplanned stop right there on the tracks. That unexpected halt set the stage for what would become a devastating tragedy. Not long after, another train heading to Babylon with 1,200 passengers got the wrong signal. The engineer thought it was clear to go and picked up speed. Then, at 6:29 p.m., it slammed into the back of the stopped Hempstead train at about 30 miles an hour. The crash was brutal. The last car of the Hempstead train was ripped open, and the front car of the Babylon train smashed into it so hard the roof shot 15 feet into the air. The aftermath was heartbreaking. 78 people lost their lives, and 363 others were injured. It remains the deadliest accident in LIRR history, a devastating reminder of how quickly a moment of miscommunication can turn into tragedy. When investigators looked into what went wrong, they discovered it was all down to human error. The Babylon train's engineer ignored caution signals, and the Hempstead train's brakeman didn't do enough to warn others. After such a heartbreaking tragedy, the LIRR stepped up with a $6 million safety upgrade, adding automatic speed control to help stop something like this from happening again. 1910 Wellington avalanche train wreck. In late February 1910, 2 trains from the Great Northern Railway, a passenger train called the Spokane Express and a fast mail train, found themselves stuck near Wellington, Washington. They were supposed to be heading to Seattle, but Mother Nature had other plans. A relentless snowstorm swept through the Cascade Mountains, burying the tracks in huge snowdrifts. Crews worked tirelessly for days to clear the track, but the snowfall just wouldn't let up, keeping the train stuck, stranded in the middle of nowhere. In the early hours of March 1st, 1910, around 1 a.m., the unthinkable happened. a thunderstorm rolled through the Cascade Mountains, and with it came a massive avalanche from Windy Mountain. This wasn't just any avalanche. It was a half-mile long, quarter-mile wide wall of snow and debris that roared down the slope like a freight train, straight toward the stranded cars. The avalanche hit with incredible force, sweeping the helpless trains off the tracks and throwing them 150 feet into the Canoe River valley below. It was pure chaos. Tragically, 96 lives were lost. 35 passengers and 61 railroad workers had been doing everything they could to keep the trains running. Somehow, 23 people survived, pulled from their wreckage by rescue crews who risked everything to save them. After the disaster, investigators found that a forest fire had destroyed the trees above Wellington, leaving nothing to stop the avalanche. To make sure something like this never happened again, the Great Northern Railway built huge concrete snowsheds to protect the tracks. They also renamed the town Ty, a quiet way of moving on while still remembering those who lost their lives. 2023 East Palestine, Ohio rail crash. On February 3, 2023, a Norfolk Southern freight train was making its way through East Palestine, Ohio, carrying dangerous chemicals like vinyl chloride, butyl acrylate, and benzene residue. Around 8:55 p.m., disaster struck. The train derailed and 51 cars went off the tracks near the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. This triggered a massive fire that raged for days. To make things worse, 11 derailed tankers spilled around 100,000 gallons of hazardous chemicals, creating a nightmare for both locals and responders trying to contain the damage. Security footage from Salem, Ohio showed a fire beneath one of the rail cars, and that was about 20 miles before the derailment actually happened. After looking into it, the National Transportation Safety Board found the cause was a mechanical problem with the axle of one of the rail cars. Right before the derailment, the crew got a warning, which alerted them to the issue. They tried to stop the train by applying the emergency brakes, but sadly, it was too late. After the crash, people living nearby were evacuated, and the EPA kept an eye on the air and water. Norfolk Southern ended up spending $63 million to help out the community, with $18 million going toward housing and other expenses. By May 2024, they settled with the DOJ and EPA for over $310 million to cover cleanup and penalties. 1951 Woodbridge train derailment. It was a chilly, damp Tuesday evening on February 6, 1951, when the Pennsylvania Railroad's commuter train, the Broker, left Exchange Place in Jersey City, heading to Bayhead, New Jersey. The train was packed with over 1,000 passengers, many of whom were Wall Street workers eager to get home after a long day. As the train got closer to Woodbridge around 5:43 p.m., it came up on a temporary wooden trestle near Fulton Street. This trestle had been put in place for the construction of the New Jersey Turnpike. There was a posted speed limit of 25 miles per hour for this detour, but engineer Joseph Fitzsimmons was going over 50 miles per hour. The conductor, John Bishop, noticed a dangerous speed and tried to activate the emergency brake, but the dense crowd of passengers made it difficult to reach the brake in time. The train's speed was way too high, and as it approached the curve leading to the trestle, it derailed. 8 of the 11 passenger cars went off the tracks. The first 2 cars toppled over, and the third and fourth fell 26 feet, which is where most of the 85 deaths happened. The 5th and 6th cars were left hanging dangerously over a rain-slick street. Fortunately, the crash happened near a busy area, so help arrived fast. After the investigation, they found out the derailment was caused by speeding on a curve of a temporary track. The engineer Fitzsimmons survived, but he never drove a train again and worked for the Pennsylvania Railroad until 1953. 1916 Summer Street Bridge Rail Crash. On the evening of November 7, 1916, Boston was buzzing with commuters heading home. Streetcar number 393, run by the Boston Elevated Railway, left City Point at 5:13 p.m., crowded with around 60 passengers. The streetcar was headed down Summer Street, which included crossing the Summer Street Bridge, a drawbridge over the Fort Point Channel. As the streetcar neared the bridge, it was open to let a ship through, leaving a gap in the tracks. Motorman Gerald Walsh didn't see the stop sign at Melcher Street or the open bridge ahead. Even though he tried to brake, the streetcar crashed through metal gates and plunged into the 30-foot deep waters of Fort Point Channel at around 5:25 p.m. The overcrowded car sank quickly. Walsh, conductor George McKeon, and around 15 passengers managed to escape, but tragically, 46 passengers drowned, many of them trapped inside the submerged streetcar. Rescue teams quickly sprang into action, with divers working through the wreckage to recover bodies. By 3:30 a.m. the next day, the streetcar was pulled out of the channel. Boston's Public Service Commission later found that Walsh was to blame for not stopping at the posted sign. However, they noted that many of these signs were hard to spot, and some bridges didn't have them at all. In October 1917, Walsh was tried for manslaughter but was acquitted. He never drove a streetcar again and passed away around 1932. Conductor McKeon sadly died in combat in France in July 1918. 1995 Fox River Grove bus train collision. On October 25, 1995, a school bus filled with 35 students from Cary Grove High School in Illinois was on its way to school. As the bus crossed the railroad tracks in Fox River Grove, it stopped at a red light, but accidentally left the back of the bus sticking onto the tracks. At 7:10 a.m., Metra train number 624, speeding at about 50 miles per hour, crashed into the rear of the bus. The force of the collision was horrifying. The bus's body separated from its frame, resulting in the tragic deaths of 7 students and injuring 24 others. The National Transportation Safety Board stepped in to investigate the crash. They found that the way the railroad crossing was set up near the traffic light created a dangerous situation. The bus driver didn't realize the bus was partially on the tracks because there wasn't enough space between the crossing and the intersection. On top of that, the timing between the traffic lights and the railroad signals wasn't right, so there wasn't enough warning about the oncoming train.